Uh, it's very unusual for a chief of defense staff soon after a military engagement to go abroad and make disclosures that have not first been made on Indian soil, domestically in India. The concerns of the opposition, especially, are very legitimate because they've been asking these very questions, which the chief of defense staff answered by a foreign correspondent. And so I think the government needs to explain a lot of issues that require a committee to study and go into and make corrections for future, because the new counter-terror doctrine that the government has established or announced, which it calls the new normal, I mean, it has raised the stakes. It has raised thresholds of escalation, including the nuclear threshold. The government thinks that this is an admission of failure by having a review committee. By not having a review committee, it's hunky-dory, although it's totally different. We've had intelligence on operational failures, the initial attack at Pahalgam. The terrorists have not been there, have disappeared completely, and subsequent terror attacks. And we've taken a number of steps, self-congratulatory steps. Whereas there is need, as we have discussed, for a review, and I think Operation Sindoor or the Pahalgam carnage is the right time to do this review and admit whatever the chief of defense staff was talking about loudly in Singapore should be considered here.
Hello and a warm welcome to HW News Network, your one-stop show, truth be told, for some engaging and thought-provoking conversations. On the sidelines of the Shangri-La Dialogue Security Forum in Singapore, India's Chief of Defence Staff, General Anil Chauhan, acknowledged the loss of Indian air assets on the first day of the war, without quantifying the losses, after which he was targeted viciously on the social media by the right-wing trolls aligned with the BJP. Now, opposition says that this information shared with international media should have been shared at the all-party meeting first. So the big questions arise from here on. Has the right-wing ecosystem undermined the credibility of the Chief of Defence Staff? Question number one. Question number two. Did MEA and the armed forces desire deliberately as a strategy to acknowledge the losses? Question number three. Has government failed to manage the media narrative? And question number four. Is it the beginning of a new political battle around Operation Sindoor, especially after the Chief of Defence Staff interview? Joining me this evening is retired General Ashok Mehta, who joins us for this program. So thank you so much for joining, and it's a real pleasure having you on the program. My first question, sir, and your response on the Chief of Defence Staff giving an interview to Bloomberg and Reuters and not speaking to the Indian media, or this information not coming out from any of the bureaucrats back in India, but it's happening on a foreign soil. And this accusation by the opposition that why is it that he's going there and speaking? Why not this information was disclosed or shared domestically first? Are these concerns legitimate?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very unusual for a chief of defense staff soon after a military engagement to go abroad and make disclosures that have not first been made on Indian soil, domestically in India. General Chauhan, either he was authorized or he was not authorized. I think the former is probably more credible because it's beyond his pay grade to go outside and say the kind of things he said. He said a lot more than was legitimate or necessary, and therefore the not just the opposition, I think well-meaning commentators like me and all Indians would should have been informed of this before he went abroad. And I get this information from Reuters and Bloomberg, whereas I should have got this on my own media. So I don't know why this happened, how this happened. It's very unusual, it's abnormal, and the government needs to explain how this has happened. And the concerns of the opposition, especially, are very legitimate because they've been asking these very questions, which the chief of defense staff answered by a foreign correspondent. And so I think the government needs to explain.
No, but there is another way of looking at it, that maybe that the government has strategized like that we'll speak to the foreign media first and Bloomberg and Reuters, and then we will answer, once the multi-party delegations return. Maybe that could be a strategy. So what I'm trying to understand is that, does it look like a well thought out strategy by the government, the MEA and the armed forces?
No, I don't think so. I think from little that I have seen and watched, I don't think this government is in the habit of doing things according to well-planned strategies. There's a lot of ad hocism, and in this case, I don't know what on earth the government thought, that it would be better for the chief of defense staff to make the revelation. It's quite legitimate for a defense minister, at least, or the national security advisor, to make the pronouncements and the admissions that the chief of defense staff has gone and made on foreign soil at the Shangri-La dialogue.
No, but what really surprises me, we've all covered press conferences and the way they are organized under Modi regime. They're very well sanitized. It's not that anybody can ask any random questions. But if you look at the setting in which General Anil Chauhan's that soundbite which it appeared with that Singaporean anchor, it does appear that that soundbite or that clip which we see is not well organized. I mean, how can a chief of defense staff come on the sidelines of a summit, talk to this anchor, just sitting there in a very casual environment, and then this becomes viral? Obviously, people are going to ask questions. That he's not an ordinary person. He's your chief of defense staff. Where were the media managers? What were they doing? And how did they allow him to give a soundbite like this, which looks so frivolous and random?
Well, I think that's a decision that the Chief of Defense Staff, General Chauhan, made by himself, the environment that he chose. But I think the more legitimate question is what he said. The kind of things he said are the very questions that people have been asking from day one after the strikes, and answers to which have already been provided, or at least part of the answer was already provided by foreign media. There is so much already come out in the Western press on loss of air assets, and for the chief of defense staff to only confirm without indicating the numbers. And here we are obviously talking about the aircraft that were lost on the first day. And now, after what he has said about the tactical mistakes made, again, I mean, I cannot understand for my life that why does he have to go and make these admissions abroad on foreign soil without first letting the government or letting a committee go into the shortfalls, because that's not the only tactical error. There are lots of other mistakes that have been made. So for him to talk about these tactical errors and at length, and in fact make admissions about our strategy, our counter air operations, the errors in that was also quite unusual for a chief of defense staff. He should just have said we've lost some air assets due to the actions, but we completed our mission that was given to us. And so I think that would have concluded the conversation.
But now what happens? I mean, after these admissions have been made, indirect admissions by Vikram Misri, then we've also seen the military officers earlier confirm. They said that we neither confirm nor deny, and losses are part of the combat. And now we have the admission coming in from CDS Anil Chauhan. So is this a turning point in the 1 month and about 10 or 11 days of Operation Sindoor we have seen? And does this look like a new political battle, which now apparently Prime Minister Modi and the entire BJP will have to answer?
Well, I think it's it's firstly an admission of the tactical errors that were made. And, this opens up a whole can of worms about the mission that was allotted to the Air Force, how the Air Force went into its counter-air operations, about suppression of air defense and establishing air superiority or air dominance, and how, because of the faulty mission that was given, or the restraint with which this mission was, terms of this mission were framed, resulted in loss of aircraft, and the risk that pilot took in engaging those targets in the primary mission that was taken by the Indian Air Force. So it brings into question a lot of issues that require a committee to study and go into and make corrections for future, because the new counter-terror doctrine that the government has established or announced, which it calls the new normal, I mean, it has raised the stakes. It has raised thresholds of escalation, including the nuclear threshold. And because it's a doctrine that will require a lot more investment in defense, calls for very detailed scrutiny of what our current spending is and what it should be, and especially if the Air Force, as we've seen now, if aerial engagement is going to be the sword arm of military operations, then a huge lot of investment has to go into the Indian Air Force. The Indian Air Force chief, after the after success of Ops Sindoor, was talking the other day, just 2 days or 3 days ago, at the CII conference, and he said this. He made this startling announcement that do why does the public sector undertakings make commitments that they can't keep? In other words, he's telling them that you tell me you will deliver my aircraft on time, and I haven't got a single aircraft. So why do you make these commitments? He's making these public pronouncements accusing and rightly so, of the HAL, to be very specific, of not keeping to its targets. And the Air Force should have 45 squadrons. I think the figure 45 also needs review. 45 was decided 30 years ago. 30 years ago, the geostrategic environment was different. Today, we are talking of a hot war. This is only a non-contact war. What about a hot war with Pakistan, with China, and we've got Bangladesh coming up? So what happens? We are down to 31 squadrons, he's telling you, and there is no movement on further investment. The world across, even yesterday and today, the Brits have carried out a strategic defense review. We have never done one. Never, we have never done one. We never produced a white paper. We don't have a national security doctrine. Our chief of defense staff says we don't need one. But we have a counter-terrorism doctrine. Amazing. So I think a lot needs to be done on promoting, enhancing this so-called deterrence and escalation dominance. You know, these are very highfalutin, fanciful words that we use. But to add meaning to these, we must have military power, real military power, not through rhetoric, but through actual investment. And I mean, I've only given you the example of the Air Force. I mean, look at the Navy. The Navy is asking for a third aircraft carrier. The Army is terribly deficient of its weaponry. So the government has to prioritize, and Operation Sindoor is the culmination of that. There must be, as the opposition is demanding, a Kargil-like committee. There should be a Pahalgam review committee report which should go into these aspects, especially after we've established this new normal of treating every act of terror as an act of war.
No, but General Mehta, what I want to ask you, you're a war veteran. And in every war, there are losses which both sides incur. And to admit the losses, has it been so difficult in the previous years as it looks now that, you know, the government cannot open its mouth? Why should we admit that we have lost out? Why should we admit that, you know, our fighters have been downed? I mean, I just don't understand the logic and the politics behind it. Is it so difficult? And what have we, I mean, we've seen 1962, we've seen 1971, then we saw the Kargil war. The admission of losses, why does it become so difficult, especially once the war is over or the conflict is over? Or do you think that it's so difficult for Modi to acknowledge the losses just because he has given a clarion call that Operation Sindoor has not got over and we are still on, and he's trying to gain a political mileage out of it?
No, I think this is a fallacy. Why we conceal our losses? Because, I mean, you take the case Balakot, There was no concealment because Pakistanis came at you within 24 hours. Their counter strike came within 24 hours. They shot a MiG 21. We shot our own MI 8 in friendly fire. We lost a pilot. It was all there in the open. Now, by concealing what we've got, Pakistan is saying we've lost 6 aircraft. Somebody is saying we've lost 4 aircraft. And
We also saw the Vajpayee. No, we saw the Vajpayee era also after the Kargil war. I think just within 3 or 4 days, the Kargil Review Committee was constituted. Why can't things like these happen in Modi regime? Is it so difficult, or they don't have the foresight to think on this line at this point of time because they're so busy taking the political mileage?
firstly, if you have a review like this, which is again an error of judgment, that the government thinks that this is an admission of failure by having a review committee. By not having a review committee, it's hunky dory, although it's totally different. We've had intelligence on operational failures, the initial attack on at Pahalgam. The terrorists have not been there, have disappeared completely, and subsequent terror attacks. And we've taken a number of steps, self-congratulatory steps. Whereas there is need, as we have discussed, for a review. And I think Operation Sindoor or the Pahalgam carnage is the right time to do this review and admit whatever the Chief of Defence Staff was talking about loudly in Singapore should be considered here. And the government should also learn how to assign missions. If the government is going to assign a mission which is warped, which is strategically not logical, strategically not rational, but because we want to show restraint, because we want to tell the world that we only are targeting terrorist attacks, we take these risks and lose aircraft. Now, you have to balance our responsible response, our intention not to escalate, our intention to be a responsible power, and balance it with the risks and the losses. After all, a Rafale aircraft costs $250, $280 million. It's not a small thing. So I think the government has to take a very cool, balanced view of this, examine how this counter-terrorism doctrine was framed in a great hurry while the blood was still boiling. And as the Prime Minister says, he had sindoor in his blood. I think we should get the sindoor out of our blood and we should think rationally and come up with a proper counter-terrorism doctrine that does not take the kind of risks we take. And I think it was ridiculous. The initial response, the so-called responsible response, had escalation built in. Why did it have escalation built in? Because unlike in Balakot, after the strikes, we had told Pakistan, this is the end of our operation. We intend carrying out no further operation. The next day, the Pakistanis carried out their counter-strike and did not escalate, so the matter was over. This time, after we had carried out our strikes, and people have failed to notice this, we added any Pakistan misadventure. In other words, if Pakistan responds to these strikes, we will respond correspondingly. Now, every breathing, thinking Pakistani knows, and every Indian knows, that Pakistan has to respond. Pakistan had to respond, and it did within 24 hours, and it suffered. It suffered a great damage to 9 or 11 airfields, but it kept the image and dignity of the force कि revenge लेंगे हम, बदला लेंगे, and they will not let a strike go unresponded. And they responded, and we knew it. So the escalation was built in.
Right.
And
But
telling
other thing, yes, one last bit on which I also wanted to ask you that CDS Anil Chauhan also said that 15% of the army's time went in tackling fake news. Now, does it also imply, I'm using the word IMPLY, that it's implied that he's saying that fake news came across as a challenge for the armed forces? Whom would you blame now? Would you blame the Godi media channels for this? The kind of narrative which they played out that as Islamabad has been captured, Karachi has been demolished. If the CDS is saying that 15% of the army's time was spent in tackling fake news, then that's a big admission, and it goes to give a very sad commentary on the mainstream channels.
I think it's a whole of government mistake. After all, Mr. Vaishnav, who's the INB minister, they had issued a code of conduct, and they only targeted media which is not friendly to the government, which includes you, and which includes other channels who are not normally, I mean, I think I've used the wrong word, not friendly. You are critical of the government. And it's the job of everybody to be critical. Constructive criticism is very useful. But there are other channels who were talking about attacking Karachi. They were calling all kinds of names. I mean, I am ashamed of some of the veterans who were on these channels and talking very undignified. And therefore, I think the government should have really ticked off, wrapped them on the knuckle, some of these channels that were talking about reaching Islamabad or attacking Karachi. So a code of conduct is required, but more than that, we now have an integrated defense staff. We have a tri-service organization. We now need a department or an agency of information warfare, which must be ahead of the curve. It must, in this battle of narratives, it must be ahead. And for example, for 15 days between the Pahalgam attack and our response, we were mum. There was no outreach, diplomatic outreach, barring, I think, one ambassador in London, Doraiswamy, barring him, I don't remember anybody else saying a word. And we only got into action after the 10th, and our delegations are still out, whereas the Pakistanis were working on the phone much before we even thought of it. So they are always ahead of us for some reason or the other. And therefore, I think the CDS was right in saying that we spent 15 minutes of time countering this. If they had a proper organization, he wouldn't have said that.
Absolutely. So I don't know. I mean, and the worst part is that the CDS is being trolled for this kind of an admission that, he's admitted to losses. So the right-wing ecosystem begins to start trolling and questioning his competence. But how will the government now tackle this political battle? Because it's a new turning point again. And once CDS is back, once the multi-party delegations are back, how the government is going to handle all of this is something to wait and watch out for. Thank you so much, General Mehta, for joining on HW. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.